Hi, I'm Oliver Cornely from the University of Cologne, and today's video is 90% actually for my group in my Institute of Translational Research here at the university. But since we developed this over the years together with Yannick Stemmler, and a how to draft a manuscript is how we call this internally, it might be of interest to the occasional viewer. So it's Yannick's and my work here, and we go right into detail. It's very technical, okay? So it's not about fungi or something. So the first thing is how to name the files, and since we are now working here with close to 70 people, we really need a structure because otherwise we will lose time. And all of this is actually only on saving time. So the naming convention for electronic files is internally, and that could be other ways there that are at least equally as good, but this is what we use. So we do have a project name, and that's followed by an underscore, and then document name, and underscore again, and the date of this version. So it's not the file date, it's just the date when I work on this, and or somebody in the group works on this, the author, and that's another underscore, and then it's the initials of the author, and then that author might send it on to somebody else who is an author too, and if that second author then has worked on this, then it's underscore and again initials. So it might be a long list of a long line of initials there, which is perfectly okay. And actually only the author who's the owner, so the first author who's the owner of that document is entitled to change the date. And once that author changes the date, all the underscore and initials thing will be deleted, okay? But each and every version is stored, so you can always go back and go back to an earlier version. And if you're missing something, if you think there was a wrong correction made or change made, then you can go back in the file. So these archive files, if we write a paper, might be several dozen of files. So it might be 50, 60, 70 files. With the guidelines, it will be a 3-digit number, but we save all these files and we keep them, well, so to say, forever. And so only the main author assigns the date. But the main author must assign a new date if that main author works on this, with the example, on the 29th of July in 2021. And that is how it might then look. I mean, with some colors now, just to highlight things. Usually that would be, of course, just black and white or so in a folder, in an electronic folder. So here you can see that that process that I just went through: first draft being written, then first draft reviewed by LG, whoever LG is, and then there's another author, MB, reviewed that draft, then it went back to the owner of the document, the first author. And but that was only 2 days later because it took some time to review. So now we are on the 30th of July, and that is why the date is being updated, and the underscore and the initials are gone now, and it's being sent to some other person for review, DM, etc. I think the other lines are really self-explaining now. So that's technicality number one. It will continue like this, very technical. So there are default settings in Microsoft Word, and we always select language, which 99% is English, but we have to decide on whether it's US or UK English, and that would depend on the target journal, of course, and the purpose. And then we do have paragraph settings, and I really prefer before it's 0 and after it's 6. But that is more something that I like, but I have the impression I get more on a page. And if it were just a letter and not a full manuscript being written here, and it eases the reading. And all fonts must be either with or without serifs. because otherwise it just doesn't look like. So it's a convention that I didn't make up. It's a convention that was just out there before I wrote my first texts. And line spacing is 1.5 usually, and endnote instant formatting off, so that it's not automatically interfering while you are writing something. You're inserting a reference, and then the entire manuscript is being worked through by EndNote, and it's all neat and nice, but you're being interrupted in your workflow, which is never a good thing. Default settings in Microsoft PowerPoint are very, well, just a few. The first slide should be a title slide. The second slide would be a conflict of interest slide. And with that, we leave Microsoft PowerPoint for now. Very general rules that I teach. We actually have a student course where we teach how to write a paper, and we then have the students collect data with ethics approval, etc., collect data, and then we all together write a paper. And it's a maximum of 10 students on this. And we have some nice publications, some nice field studies, so to say. So that is, for example, where we use, and with each and every new member of this institute, of this group, we use these general rules. So tense, stick to the same tense. I don't know whether it is specific for Germans, but we always move between the tenses in the text, and that is, of course, not good. Usually simple past throughout the article. Then a chronology. I think that is really important, and I see a lot of papers where that was not done, not from my group, because they all know, but there is, for example, if there are diagnostic sequences or descriptions of symptoms or reporting of previous study findings on a topic, that all that, whatever follows a chronology, should be presented in chronology, unless there is a really, really good reason not to do so, because usually things are easier to understand if they come in a chronological order. At least that is what, I'm not a genius, so I need things really palatable and in a nice sequence that I can tick the boxes, so to say. And then there's another one, and that's the alphanumeric order. When listing equally ranked objects, for example, drug names, then they should come in an alphabetical order, because otherwise you rank them. Otherwise you give preference to the one that you mentioned first, or maybe to the one that you mentioned last, certainly not to the one in the middle. So an example, if you would list all the echinocandins, which is, as you may know, 3 at the moment that are licensed. So if you list them all because you address the echinocandins, and then you go for parentheses open and then the 3 candins, then they must come, if they are just being addressed as a class, they must come in this sequence, A, C, M, alphanumeric. Any other would imply a ranking, and that should only be done if there's an intention to do so. Numbers and figures, that is very generic, I'd say. Numbers 1 to 13 are written in full, 14 onwards as actual numbers. Don't start a phrase with a number. If needed, write that number at the beginning of a sentence in full. And for figures, mostly it's better if the text in a figure is bold and black on white, or vice versa, or something that really gives contrast. And specifically if it's now smaller or being projected, so you really want people to be able to read and see what you publish. When sending your draft to co-authors, always enhance track changes. I receive about 10 texts per day where could you have a look, could you read this, and could you go through this, could you review that draft? So I really hated to activate track changes 10 times per day. So if you're in my group working with me here in Cologne, please, please, please always track changes. And use track changes for any relevant changes. And if there was a change and it was a reaction to a comment, then that comment apparently is resolved. So remove the comment. That's perfectly okay to do so. for the owner of the manuscript. So the first author should take care of this and clean the manuscript, but keep track changes activated. And resolve ideally all solved comments, ideally all comments, before sending it for the next round of review. Article structure. That is what we teach students. And it's always good to go back to this for me too. Open an empty Word document, then write down the headers, and then you already have the structure. And then you begin drafting with the introduction. Once that is finished, other parts will follow. When writing, that's important, use bullet points. Don't sit down and just write a text, but use bullet points and do not produce full sentences, but enter ideas. Things that you want to have in there, where you don't want them to be forgotten. You just want to park there, and then during the next steps, it will automatically move to the best place in the paper. So you route these bullet points of individual thoughts, you route that to your co-authors at any stage felt appropriate. Type all ideas you want to mention under this header. Sort all the bullet points, then next step in chronological order. So again, chronology very important. And it helps in understanding. And the chronology can be different things. It could be from the perspective of the patient. So first the fever, then the CT scan, for example. So why would you ever turn that around? And it could be the perspective of a pathogen or an organism other than a human, and it could be a molecule. If you want to describe where a molecule goes and how it's being metabolized, then you wouldn't start with excretion. You would start with the chronology from the perspective of the molecule, I guess. And once all that is done and the bullets are sorted in their chronological order, then convert the bullets into one sentence each. So you need to fill in a word here and there so that it's a nice sentence. And the next step, and you might run it through the team of authors once more before going to number 9, which is remove the bullets in favor of plain text and then check whether it nicely flows. Otherwise, make it flow. The introduction. The length should not be more than 1 page. References are needed in introduction. No sentence should be there without a reference. Or it should really be the exception. And there must be a good reason not to have a reference for something. Use as few references as possible. Don't reference everything you have read, but only the ideal reference for that one argument in that line with that bullet point. Do not cite reviews, guidelines, or books, but search for the original publication. Of course, there are situations where you specifically want to address a guideline. You could write about 2 guidelines that have conflicting statements in there, and that might be the point from where your article is now starting your study. So there are reasons to do so, but don't quote a review just because there is one sentence in the review you refer to. You rather want to go for the original publication behind that sentence. Often a manuscript or study idea results from previous work of our own group. Occasionally, we still forget to cite our own work, although it's the logical sequence that we did study A and now we do study B. So go through the publications of our group and evaluate whether there is a suitable fit. But it should really be a suitable fit, not just for the purpose to cite your own work, but it should really make sense and belong into the flow of the text. And if that is the case, then it should be cited in your paper. Next stop is, of course, patients and methods in that article structure. Usually there are no citations in this section. There are, of course, exceptions. It could, for example, be that a methodologically relevant citation, such as a lab method, just belongs there. or a guideline methodology based on being used as the basis of the presented work. And it could be that if you use the same method in a prior paper, because it's just another study with the same method, then, for example, you published a study protocol elsewhere, so then refer to such publication and give only reduced information on the methods in the current draft. If you actually use the same method that you have used before, and you don't just refer to it and then give in a nutshell the core information, but you type it all over again, then it might be that your paper is being flagged by the submission systems or editorial systems, or at the editor's end, flagged for plagiarism, just because you had the same method. So that is unnecessary trouble, and you can just refer to where the method has been described before. Results: no citations in this section. If you cite something in this section, you must have a real good reason. Usually you diverted from the strict methodology of paper writing, and you're about to interpret something. So that is nice if you want to interpret your results, but it belongs to the discussion. So stay with the results for the moment. No citations in this section is the rule. And in general, avoid redundancy between text and tables. However, it's okay to present the real key results twice, in text and in a figure. That's perfectly okay and helps understanding and making the point. Discussion. So that's where you discuss the key findings of your present study. Well, and you do so, the core of discussion is comparing it to something else which is out there, and that means comparing to published literature. Don't cite names of authors, cite their studies. And be decent. Don't state this is the largest, best, only fantastic sample in the world, or to the best of our knowledge, this is. It doesn't convey information. It does convey information about you, but not about the data, not about the study. So actually, these sentences are not needed. The value of our work in the end is judged by our peers, right? The editor, the reviewer, and the readers. Each paragraph should actually start with a key finding and with the main finding at the beginning. So imagine somebody who's really tired, so he doesn't want to, you don't want that reader to misunderstand what you did just because you bring your best and most important points somewhere in the middle of the discussion. So you start with key finding and at the first paragraph, and you always should have a paragraph about the limitations of the study. No study without limitations. So usually that is the last but one paragraph. Often it's where it's a good place to put it. And the very last paragraph in the discussion should then bring a conclusion. What is the conclusion of all the work that you presented in that article? What is the core, the main conclusion? And you may miss one of the sections of an article, but the reason is that the abstract should only be written once you wrote the article. You may have an abstract already because you presented your study, your results, your material at a conference. So you can base, of course, the abstract for the article on that abstract, on your previous work that you already invested in the same study. But in general, there are changes to that abstract. Abstracts for conferences are just different from abstracts for articles. And you will see that when you go through it after you wrote the article, then you will no longer be happy with your abstract for that new purpose of an article and not conference. And the article is usually structured, but that depends on the target journal again. But whether it's structured or not, which is more technical view, it usually has a sequence and starts with the background and then objective. Sometimes that is part of background. and the patients or patients and methods, and then the results sections and a conclusion. Well, now the article is written, including abstract. The whole thing is ready to be sent off. No, it's not, because there are some more things that you need to address. You will be asked for keywords during the submission process. So the purpose of the keywords is that your article is found if somebody types in these keywords in a search. And that can be any search engine or PubMed or wherever on the website of a journal. So that's what the keywords are there for. And usually all the words in a title are used as keywords by the journal or the publishing house anyway. So it's not necessary to repeat all the keywords that are in the title, but there might be additional keywords because you kept your title crisp and short and nice. So there might be some other words that would help finding your article if they were part of a search string. So that's where you should choose your keywords from. And then now the references, you were already missing them because I didn't address the references. So citation style depends on journal, of course. For internal work and funding proposals, we usually use Vancouver style. And if we place a reference, we usually place it before the period, the full stop, always at the end of a phrase, rarely elsewhere in the sentence. Unless you have very long sentences, then it might be reasonable to place them right next to the argument, exactly to the point where you are citing that information from that reference. However, maybe it's better to have not that long sentences, and then it's appropriate to have it at the end of a shorter sentence. The EndNote default settings for the journal abbreviations, that's something very special, and I have no idea why that is, but it's very, very helpful. It makes my life much easier. If you go to edit and then output style and edit style, and then you choose the journal name, and in that style, for whatever reason, it's it has less trouble if you go for journal abbreviation 2, and then you don't run into trouble with uppercase versus lowercase initials and all these things in your reference list, where then it might no longer be very homogenic. It might be just a mess. If you go for abbreviation 2, then that is alleviated. And there is more in an article, tables and figures. So tables should be able to stand alone. That means that only with the title and the legend, if there is nothing else, title, legend, and the figure or table itself, that should be enough. That should be enough information to understand what it's about and what population, for example, characteristics are in that table. Imagine a presenter who wants to cut and paste that figure from a PDF and put it on a slide. That process should work, and you should facilitate that process, because we all love to be cited and make it easy for those who present to cite. All abbreviations in a table or figure need to be explained in the appropriate legend to that non-text item. And images, well, you should use color as appropriate. No reason to stay with black and white only. And some journals now have a print and an electronic edition. Electronic, of course, they accept color, but if there is a print too, then it could be that the print edition is black and white. If so, you may have to turn in your figures in 2 versions, black and white and one with color. Color is nice, but it's sometimes expensive to print it. So that's why there are 2 different versions, I guess. Co-authorship. That's a very important thing, because nothing is as terrible as having lost a person from the author byline who should have been an author, but you just in the moment where you decided on the author byline, you didn't think of that person because there was a major contribution, but that was 2 years ago. Well, that's not good. So the thing is that whenever we start a project, and that's not on the slide actually, when we start a project and that we create at the same time that empty Word file. And apart from the structure with introduction, etc., we have that author line. So we park everybody who had a contribution is being jotted down in that paper, in that Word file. So you can't lose them. You may note some names where you thought they would have a contribution and then they didn't contribute for whatever reason. You can always delete them during the drafting process of the paper. So some other aspects, the person writing the paper is the first author. The principal investigator is the last author. There are exceptions, of course, but they need to be discussed with the head of department or some senior person to understand whether or not that person should be the last author or not. So if there are papers being written, manuscripts being drafted in my group, and I supervise whatever happens in my group, but that was it in terms of contribution to that manuscript, then I don't want to be the last author on this. Okay, I will be wherever it's appropriate, if at all, an author. Shared first and shared last positions should be discussed with that senior person, with that head of department, because it may have implications that are specific to a specific university where the work is being carried out, and one needs to know what the implications are of these shared first and last positions. Then all your sub-investigators, if it's a clinical study, should be acknowledged, or authors, depending on what exactly their input was. Project management, statistician, you may not have all of these positions with all studies, with all manuscripts, but it's better to have a list that is more comprehensive. If there is no data manager involved, of course, then you don't mention a data manager. Then the external sub-investigators, and this is not a sequence, so this is just who should be on there. The sequence then is a separate art to have the appropriate sequence of the authors. Essential contributors, technical support, study nurses all go into the acknowledgements. If mentioned, then they are mentioned there. You may have a second line of authors where they are not authors, but contributors. So that's relatively new, but many journals accept that, so that you do have contributors. The thing is that they are being, their names are becoming keywords for PubMed and article searches. So they are mentioned, and it factors into their age index, for example, but they are not strictly authors. So, and that is, of course, not the case when you're just mentioned in the acknowledgement. So think about that. There's something between author and acknowledgement, and that's the contributorship. So there it is on the slide. When a project is conceived, just from the beginning, write down all the names of the people who helped, so that you don't forget any contributor. And if there is somebody who, as said, then finally did not contribute, or only a tiny little bit, then you can discuss with that person and think about where is the appropriate place. It's not authorship, it might be contributor, or if it's really a small contribution, it might be acknowledgement. From the beginning, when we collect all the names, and as just mentioned, we want to have the ORCID numbers, and we usually now turn in papers with a table at one of the front pages of the draft manuscript, as shown here, in very generic terms, so that you have all the ORCID numbers, because ORCID is really very helpful, and we always should mention these. And sometimes you find authors who are very young or for whatever reason didn't know what ORCID is and don't have one. So if they agree to register at ORCID, then it's very helpful to in the next step then put them in that table. Everybody working here and the co-workers from other places that we work a lot with, we have in a table on a protected space in our server, so that it's easy to just collect the ORCID numbers from there with the next publication. If it comes to the selection of the target journal, and while you write the paper, you will already have some ideas which journal could be interested and could be the right bridge to the readership you strive for. So select the journal before drafting the final manuscript, of course, and then check whether there were any articles, or more so recent articles, on your publication topic in that target journal you're aiming for. If there were some, then it's usually reasonable to cite them if appropriate. So they need to fit the flow and to support the argument that you're making in your text. And follow the author guidelines of the target journal in every detail. Citation style depends on journal and is given in the author instructions, as we all know, but we should really look there. And well, not following the author instructions may actually lead to rejection, to frustration, so desktop editorial rejection, editorial staff sending the thing back, frustration, and even more work for the author, which is a pity, because if you need to do the work twice, it keeps you from writing your next paper. A few words on abstracts, posters, and presentations. Size and format and style may depend on the conference, on the event, or the journal, of course, certainly the latter. And I suggest create a presentation for every first author publication in order to present it on the YouTube channel of my group, ID in Motion, and of course at any other events. So like this one, we prepared this as a PowerPoint for our students and for the new members in the group, and as a reference. And so there's no reason not to put it on Infectious Diseases in Motion. And we are open, by the way, to submissions, so to say, or suggestions from other groups. And it's not only people from Cologne appearing on ID in Motion. And with that, thank you all for your attention. And for my wonderful, energetic, and inspiring team in Cologne, please follow this guideline to make life easier, your life, my life, everybody's life, and make publishing the fun it really is. Thank you very much. And thank you, Yannick, for your help with this presentation and with all the instructions and guidance. Thank you. Bye.